People will talk. Welcome to another episode of the People Will Talk podcast. This is a first for the show. We have a returning guest. This has never happened before, but it's a quality to how successful your first spin on the podcast was, Lindsay. Lindsay Moxon, welcome back to the show.
Hello there. How you doing? Good. And hello, Maria.
Yes. Great to have you. It's good to be back.
It's your second time in the podcast, but first time with the two hosts as normal as well. So, okay. Lindsay, let's talk about movies today. You've drawn up an impressive list for us to talk about specific moments, performances, the subjectivity of how we appreciate movies and things like that. And myself, of course, and my wonderful co-host here will be contributing with our own examples of these different categories as well. So we'll be having a fascinating discussion. But Lindsay, you were the driver behind this topic, a very interesting topic. What is it about movies and specific things in those movies that have compelled you so much?
Well, sometimes it's not specifically the movie that impresses you, but there are some parts of a movie that really jump out at you. And you think, oh, this is really something. I mean, often can be in a movie that you're impressed by generally, that you love, and this is just a good part of it. Other times it's a movie that's okay, but there is something about it. There is some a person or a scene or a group performance that seems to work like above and beyond the normal. That's basically the idea. Now, the problem here is that it's very subjective. It's all about individuals' reaction to a look or a scene or a person, etc. So
it's so personal in two senses, I believe, because you're right. It's subjective where you might nominate something and I might go, no, of course not. This is, how could you like that? For example, that's the essence of people having a debate about movies. But also, it's so personal in the sense that if you talk about a look or a specific moment, it stays with you, and it's personal in that sense because it's in your mind and etched into your kind of consciousness like that. So we have three categories here. The single look or moment. Will we start with this? There's a few great examples here. The Maltese Falcon, a wonderful movie. Walk the Line, Master and Commander, Bridge Too Far, which is a classic war movie as well. State of Grace with the amazing Ed Harris, Deadwood, and Homicide with the equally fantastic William Macy. Maria, these movies, are you familiar with any of these?
I would say about half. I'm embarrassed to say only about half of them. So I look forward to hearing more about it. I would say Maltese Falcon, yes, is a classic. In Spain too, and I Walk the Line, Master and Commander. But I look forward to being enlightened about some of the others. For example, Bridge Too Far is unknown to me. I don't know if you want to tell us about that a little bit.
Okay, well, we'll start out of order if you like. And first of all, I know it's difficult because if you haven't seen these particular movies, it means it's dead air in a way, like well, you're just describing somebody cannot see. So I understand that might not make any sense, but I'm surprised you've seen half of these. That's great. That's really good. Well, A Bridge Too Far is a movie. It's got a fascinating history. The fascinating screenwriter, fascinating producer, and in the original story, which is about Operation Market Garden, is a fascinating piece of history as well. All right. But that aside, I mean, what I was wanting to say is that sometimes within this whole context, something can come out that really makes you like stop and look at that particular person. And it's almost like you have it's exaggerated, but it's almost like you've got a psychic connection with that person in the moment. The moment that I'm talking about is when they finally lose the battle, more or less, in one part of it called Arnhem, and Anthony Hopkins plays a real character, and he shows the face of defeat in his eyes as he's with a group of soldiers who are captured in a town square. Now, that's kind of ordinary people sitting and looking. It doesn't sound very interesting, but the expression in his eyes for me was just such a combination of emotions. Like, first of all, shame about being defeated, and an absolute resolute look in his eyes that this is not going to happen again, and also like this infinite sort of sadness of the things around him. And okay, you can write this down if you want. You can write this on some paper, or you can describe it in an elaborate dialogue. But what impressed me is that you saw it in a second, and that's what the first section for me is so fascinating.
It's a great example as well, because you mentioned Hopkins plays a real character, and it is a movie that is more or less historically accurate. And I think to kind of develop this theme in the war sense in Saving Private Ryan, if anybody has seen, I'm sure a lot of people have seen that. Tom Hanks's character has shaky hands at different points, and is it war stress? Is it some kind of disease? And there's a moment where they make a plan where they're going to go to find the titular Private Ryan, and while they're sitting around a table with a map, his hands start shaking, and they all look with pity and empathy at him without saying anything. And it's kind of a sense of, he's our leader, he's showing weakness, but also we care for him as a human being. And like you described, you can describe that, you can write it down, but in the movie it happens maybe 2 or 3 times and nobody ever actually mentions it, but it's so present. Perhaps even amplified by the fact that nobody's actually talking about it, and it's a very effective and affecting look. Also in the war.
You're right. I think you're right. I mean, it's their acceptance of the fact that he is terrified and depressed, but still keeps going is pretty obvious, on the faces. You've seen The Saving Private Ryan, Maria?
Yes, a long time ago, but yes, I have.
You mentioned here as well Deadwood, which is a TV show. So I don't know if anybody here has seen Mad Men, but there is also a great look between Don Draper and his daughter when he shows his children where he grew up. Have you seen that, Lindsay?
No, I have seen Mad Men, but I can't remember this scene.
See, that's how personal, as we mentioned at the start of the show, for me, it's stuck with me, and for other people, they might go over their head, or not over their head, but it might not stay with them in the same way. But his whole idea is that I won't give away spoilers, but it's a search for meaning and identity, and Don Draper is a mask in a sense as well. And when he shows where he grew up to his 2 children, his son is oblivious to the meaning behind it, but his daughter gives him this knowing look, and he returns that look, and she understands why he is the man that he is because of how he grew up as well. And it's a very it's a show that captures the glamour of the 60s, the style. It's all about marketing as well, isn't it? But is that this kind of human moment between these 2 characters, I think, is one of the standout and underscored moments in the season. Again, this is a season that has dealt with, a show that's dealt with the assassination of JFK, Martin Luther King, with these titanic, amazing episodes, but it's also filled with these wonderful quiet moments as well. And without wanting to dominate with my nominations, I'm sure my fantastic co-host would also have something to chip in as well with amazing looks like the one you're giving me now.
It's I think the most interesting thing is that even without having seen, because I haven't seen the 2, the movie and the show that you have mentioned, but I can get a sense of it from what you're saying. And also I think the key thing is that you can really picture it in your head like a normal person's reaction. So in a given situation. So I think that's, gives credit to how good the actor is, that you kind of feel that you're looking at a real person. So it's interesting to be listening to the things that you're saying without actually seeing it, because I'm forming an idea in my head immediately. So
yeah, I agree, because I can't remember that scene from Mad Men either, but you can kind of empathize with that moment. And you can imagine how that would be so powerful. Yeah, I understand. I mean, it's like having the macro idea of, the history of the 60s, etc., and advertising. But when it comes down to it, when you have these tiny moments, that's where you really become, I don't know, attached to the drama, I think.
I think there's a famous advert from Thailand where a kid steals because he needs medication for his mother, and he gets caught by the guy who owns the pharmacy. And the key scene in this advert is like he's kind of looking up dramatically at the guy who's caught him, and there's a moment there. And it just goes to show it's a nice advert, but you're being manipulated with that look as well, which shows two things: that Hollywood or people making these things know the power of a good look. And it's a simple thing, but when it's done well, but you can see the strings behind it. And then when it's in Mad Men or Saving Private Ryan or Bridge Too Far, when you don't see the strings, and that's the acting behind it, and it's actually a lot of layers to it. Now there's some other, as we mentioned, fantastic examples here: the Maltese Falcon, Walk the Line, Master and Commander, and Homicide. We haven't touched on those really yet. What would you like to kind of like touch on next in this category?
The first thing is that the germ of this whole idea, just to talk about this, was Walk the Line.
Okay.
Definitely. Because there's a moment. Have you both seen Walk the Line, the movie about Johnny Cash?
I have, yeah.
Okay, Maria, I highly recommend it, because it really is like a really detailed performance. It's not full of dialogue for no reason. It's quite an emotional film. Johnny Cash, for the first time, is coming out, and he's going to perform with the Tennessee Two, which is his band, right? And the scene is built up like, oh yes, this is going to be a great performance, and this is classic. But what you get from it is, before the curtain opens, he turns and looks at the other two guys, Luther Perkins and the other guy, and he turns and looks at them, and you think he's going to be all kind of gung-ho and encouraging, and here we go, I'm going to be a star. But no, he turns around and he looks terrified. He looks terrified, but he's trying to smile. He's trying to smile and encourage them. But you can see in a second, like, the essence of stage fright, like really deep stage fright, is that everything matters in this moment. And he turns around, he tries to smile, and honestly, I cried when I saw it. Like, immediately, I thought, oh my God, I understand how this person is feeling right now. And this is just an actor, standing in front of cameras. And that's what I find so amazing, that you understand somebody's deepest emotion in like a split second. That's what fascinates me.
Well, Joaquin Phoenix, I think, is an actor who's amazing at this, because he plays a lot of quiet roles, even in The Gladiator, when he's the evil Emperor Commodus, which is a role that convinced Johnny Cash that he's the guy who should play me. There's a lot of quite intense moments where he's psychotic, but it's delivered through a look as well. And he's in The Master, I think is the name of the movie, which is basically a rip on Scientology. Joker as well, and then there's another one I'm thinking of. It's not coming to my mind, but he's Her, for example, which, Maria, I know you have seen. Again, there's all this kind of reactive stuff rather than look at me, I'm an actor, and I think he's a guy who really can inhabit that kind of look and make it live.
Yeah. I mean, I've been trying to think for the last couple of weeks about like what a Spanish actor or actress or performance is like that, and the only one I could really think of is Luis Tosar.
Oh, amazing!
In a movie, I think it's called A Hierro Mata, or something like that. It's a thriller, a drama story about crime, etc. But there's a few times in that where he just stops, doesn't say anything, and just looks into space. But you kind of get this feeling, you know what he's thinking, you know. Spoilers, who cares? You know, is he thinking about the death of his wife? You just kind of know it. And that's that intuitive thing that he can do is pretty astounding. And also Luis Tosar, I'm a big fan, is also extremely good at comedies. He's really funny, but then on the other sort of end of the spectrum, he can kind of show this stark, deep regret, which is pretty good. That's the first example I thought of, and there are others. I mean, you know.
Well, you mentioned a comedy. He's great in an Argentinian movie where he gets screwed over by the government or his company, and they launch a heist to get their money back. Yeah, and it's you see, it's played for laughs. It's amazing, and that's what a brief tangent. But we're talking about looks. So, what are your thoughts, Lindsay, on actors like Al Pacino? Who, for example, who are great actors, but have kind of, as they've gotten older, have leaned into the hooah kind of thing, where it's very,
that's right, yeah. I think that's kind of fun. I mean, it's a fine line because I know sometimes Al Pacino does that, you know, like incredibly exaggerated performance, and other times he can do the same thing, you know, with a single look. So he's obviously, you know, like. Knows how to walk that line, I think, and even step outside that line, but still get away with it. You know, unlike Jack Nicholson in The Departed, where I think it's just a cartoon performance from a great actor. You know, so it's really difficult. It's funny you should mention that because when I was talking about performance, the second part here.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about how people can go way too far in a performance, but it still works.
Okay, that's a great thread. I think we should follow that. Let's focus, because you mentioned Luis Tosar, for example. Maria, is there a Spanish actor or actress who is so exaggerated and cartoonish, it's mental, but it actually works as well? You know, maybe Luis Tosar as well is in this category.
Well, I think his impressive eyebrows sometimes play that role of giving him the startled look. But I don't know. It's quite a hard question. I don't know. Maybe you can explain a little bit more, Lindsay, about how you what it is that makes it work despite it being too exaggerated. You know what I mean?
Well, just to frame that as well, as the movie that you want to talk about as well. We have Peter Finch in Network, the classic mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore.
That's right. Yeah.
Peter O'Toole, Lawrence of Arabia, Robin Wright in State of Grace, excuse me, and then Hands of Orlac with Conrad Veidt, for example. Yep. So these are the things that you might touch on. But yeah, that's a great question from Maria as well. How would we frame this analysis?
Okay, I don't know. Because it's magic. It really is. It's just this kind of magic. I'd use the best example I could think of is Conrad Veidt in Hands of Orlac, because I mean it's a German expressionist film, and so there's like you expect a certain amount of exaggeration and grand guignol from the whole thing anyway, but his performance in that is like incredibly exaggerated. I mean, half the time Conrad Veidt, who I'm a big fan of, who is just standing like this, looking at his hands, and it's like, he's sort of possessed, but I won't give it away, but he's sort of possessed by the idea of his hands having a different life. But most of the time he's just walking around like this in this really stylized, expressionistic way. And you think, well, that's, that you cannot identify with that in the same way as you would with a more naturalistic performance. But you do. So it's magic. You just do. You identify with him, and it actually feels like deeply upsetting to watch this man sort of lose his mind in a way. But it is a really exaggerated performance, almost to the point of like beyond caricature. almost. But it just kind of works because there's just something there, and that's magic. And I don't necessarily think that, he's a genius or anything like that. I mean, I just think he did the right thing at that time and understood what he was doing. That's part of it, I think. And charisma as well. I mean, Conrad, he's got charisma, in buckets.
Well, since you're talking about performances, this is perhaps the most subjective or personal category in the list. And if you mentioned, for example, Peter Finch in Mad as Hell, we could theorize that that's us having this fantasy of saying that to our boss or society, because we get angry about things, but we don't really let vent to that. And you're right, it's so difficult to categorize because it either works or it doesn't. It's charisma, it's magic of all these different factors coming together. Even if you look at Peter O'Toole and Lawrence of Arabia, it's a fantastic movie. But really much of its time, I mean, for example, first of all, you've Alec Guinness in blackface, which wouldn't fly today, but also Lawrence of Arabia, his acting, Peter O'Toole, there's a scene where he decides, he's thinking for days and nights about how they're going to attack this gun emplacements in the sea. And then suddenly he's like,
Addis Ababa,
he will do it from behind. And this kind of moment of revelation is so wooden and stagey, but of its time, it still works because of the whole movie. So, we're looking at this as there's so many different factors that can kind of contribute to what really makes an outstanding performance that is exaggerated but works as well. And you mentioned this German expressionism film. We know, for example, in Spain in the 80s, things went mental with the types of movies that were made. But Maria, for example, can you tell us any examples of this style of really intellectual, lots of symbolism kind of movie in Spanish, the Spanish canon?
Well, I think now that we've got into this frame of mind, I was thinking when you were mentioning Lawrence of Arabia that I think part of the reason why it works for me as well is because it's such an epic story. So, an exaggerated performance sort of fits an epic story because epic stories have a little bit of an element of something that is a bit unreal. It's so everything is so dramatic that it sort of fits to have such an exaggerated reaction, because in real life you would have such a over the top reaction, but completely separate from that idea of epic, I suppose. In Spain, Almodóvar, it's this big exponent of things that are completely over the top, and characters that are completely hysterical, and and it's sort of so surreal that it works in creating this different universe where people kind of expect characters in an Almodóvar movie to be, if they were kind of normal and the performances were sort of linear, everybody would be there's something wrong here. So, I think that actually works in that respect as well.
Well, his most recent movie, though, Parallel Mothers, which I mentioned to you, Lindsay, during the week, that has this kind of extreme story, but very flat and realistic characters, and people are going crazy over it, even though it's very, very boring and very, very flat. Parallel Mothers. So, Almodóvar has actually pivoted, I think, in his most recent work to something a bit more basic, in a sense, and still people are still kind of losing their heads over him, which is I was thinking
more the... I was thinking more the 80s because you prompted me about the 80s. I was immediately, I thought, Almodóvar in the 80s is this sort of completely, OTT characters that create this universe. But it's true that, in recent times you have sort of come down a bit in that respect.
No, look, I agree with you, Maria. I sort of prefer the movies of the 80s, like Mujeres al Borde and all that, because there are exaggerated characters. There are people who are hysterical sometimes, but I think they're contrasted really well by people who are just behaving, normally in a calmer and more kind of balanced way. So therefore, you really notice the exaggerated characters a lot more. I think it's like in screwball comedy from the 1930s. If everyone's talking fast all the time and it's everyone's exaggerated, it works for a while, but then it starts to just get very flat, like elevated and very exaggerated, but flat again. So you need contrast. And I think Mujeres al Borde has got that as well. That's why I like it the most, I think.
There's one nomination I want to make for an outstanding performance. It's a movie that you're not going to like, Maria. It's Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, but it's an example of an epic movie where, because like there's a speech that Sean Astin makes about what we're fighting for, kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
And if you remember that, and it's kind of a catalyst for them to get help from the guys who are kind of taking him prisoner. But on every level, this is a speech that should not work. You know, it pulls at the heartstrings. It's so big, maybe even cliche, but damn it, he finds a way to make it human and make you even tear up as well. And he felt he should have won an Oscar for it. He didn't, but it's something that because of his there's some feedback there, I think, if you can hear that in the podcast. But it's such a moving, a powerful scene in this epic that works perhaps because it is in the epic, but also down to the wonderful acting in that particular scene. It should not work, but it does. It does completely. I'm not sure if you've seen that, Lindsay. That
I sort of only vaguely remember that scene. I know who you're talking about, but yeah, I guess Maria, maybe you think it doesn't work because it's in something that's way too epic. So there's no
well, no, I'm just not a big fan of them. Yeah, I don't know. I seem to develop a phobia for anything that any sagas or anything that become like super famous. I instantly sort of like start boring them.
too cool for school syndrome. That's what that is.
Yeah, no, I sound like a real snob, but it's not that. It's just like, it's almost like when before you're seeing something and people build it up a lot. It's like by the time you see it, I kind of like tend to be disappointed. It's just that. Yeah. Plus, I like real life movies much more than I do fantasy.
But you have seen every season of Game of Thrones, no? So,
Yeah, well, yeah. Let's talk about that on the series episode.
Game of Thrones is a good example too. I mean, first of all, it doesn't have lots and lots of short men with English accents and hairy feet, and that's always a good thing because you don't want to see that. Hobbits, for God's sake. I think that's like self-deprecating humor gone too far, I think. Hobbits. But Game of Thrones is a really good example of not necessarily performance. So we could be deviating a bit here, but
okay.
But the way that like scenes are constructed. I think Game of Thrones initially in the first 5 seasons, very good. Yeah, we know what happened at the end, But it's sort of like every single scene was like, for me, was like a short film. It wasn't just planted there and put there, but every single scene had a beginning, a development, and an end that makes you look to the future. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't just like, "Hi, how you doing? I think we should kill these people." Okay, fine. We should. Another thing would be, but it would be the characters meet. You sort of know a little bit of their history, and they develop those in a scene, a really short scene. And by the end, you're going, in the future, that's how they will be. And it was just. Did you get that impression too?
Yeah, I think that the timeline was a thing that was quite good, and I think from a historical point of view, because obviously, and as well, we're biased. We have a history background, and those sort of like geopolitics, those dynamics in reality are very real. So even if it's perhaps for me, of course, Lord of the Rings, has those. That background based in reality, but I think the thing for Game of Thrones for me in the first seasons, not later on, went a bit haywire. But at first, I think what really pulled me was that those dynamics that were quite real between like different, powers. But yet it was very believable that those tensions and, as you say, those dynamics that were created, but they kind of like gave you an idea of a much longer or much bigger world that you couldn't see, but you still understood from what you saw, the little that you saw in screen. So I think that's quite a skill. So yeah, I would agree with you on that.
I think you're exactly right. Yeah, I mean, and you feel connected to it, and you're not really quite sure why, but it's just so well constructed in scenes, looks, episodes, etc. It was really well put together, like a natural machine is moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it made you feel like, oh well, nothing here is out of tone, destonado, anything like that. So it was kind of. Yeah.
Well, the guys who wrote the show were, I think, two Irish guys, or at least one was a Beckett scholar and the other was a Joyce scholar. So you have those two influences coming into the dialogue as well. So very literary, far more than G.R.R. Martin, the guy who is the progenitor of the original book series. Okay, so we'll just take a pause here for a second. We have 8 minutes left, but don't worry. Once this runs out, I'll send you another link, and we can finish this story. So feel relaxed. Okay. So
wait here patiently.
No, we don't have to run. We can keep talking. Do you want to keep talking about performances, or do you want to keep talking, or go to the next?
Well, I mean, the hands of all. The one thing about Lawrence of Arabia, Maria, you were saying about how Lawrence of Arabia is so epic, and that's true. I think in something like Lawrence of Arabia, which is literally so big, because the desert looks huge. The desert's there's not really a character. I mean, I don't like that expression, but the desert is just like this huge backdrop that I think probably could stop you from enjoying or understanding individual performances. But this one in particular, he's standing on a sand dune with all his, Anthony Quinn and all the other people, all these Arab about to attack the Turkish people, and you can see in his eyes, it's all in his eyes too. It's all in his eyes. His eyes are starting to well up and with tears, with this rage and shame because he was raped in a few scenes before, and you can see him deciding: am I going to become this evil character, or am I going to try to fight against it? And he just, you see him give in to being evil, maybe isn't the right word, but just to let loose all the rage that he's got inside in a pair of eyes. And the backdrop is the desert, which is a huge character, I suppose, as well. But then you go focus in on just on somebody's eyes. And even beyond that, you can see enjoyment and thrill, that he's actually feeling the thrill and the excitement of really murdering a bunch of retreating soldiers, and that complexity from the large scale to the small scale is just unbelievable.
It is very interesting what you're saying, because I'm probably going to get later here, but one of my favorite movies is The English Patient. And one thing I see in common with that, I thought, but it really reminds me of what you were saying, because there's this huge character that is the desert. The desert always, for anybody who's been to a desert, you get such a sense of like being a tiny dot that it really works for a movie, and it really works for an epic story. Yeah, exactly. So for me, that contrast works so well in The English Patient as well, because you're almost lost, when the plane crashes, and then you go I take you to see these special prehistoric paintings in this cave and stuff like that, and it almost creates this universe that it's so powerful visually, the landscape is almost a character in itself. So anything that as you say, that takes you away from that, for example, a pair of eyes becomes huge, and in contrast as well, and it's very effective.
No, that's a really important thing about seeing that tiny human dot is as important as the large scene. I was actually talking to somebody last night, because a teacher, and he was saying that the comment that he gets a lot is that history is boring. For me, that's the most absurd thing. And we're talking about this by saying that people who say history is boring, you say, okay, what's your history? Where did you come from? what experiences have you had in life? And when they start talking about that, they realize, well, I had this experience, it means something to me. And one person out of the billions and billions and billions of people who have existed, that one person's story is interesting for me. And then you take that and it's multiplied by billions and billions of other stories. I mean, history for me is one of the most fascinating things, there is, of course, because it's a story of us. And so if you can, it's a long way around this, I'm sorry, but I mean, if you can portray that and show the contrast between this macro scale of history, events, landscape as well, which is the eternal history. And if you can show that, and then show one person's moment of emotion that's moving, and we all understand it. I think we all understand that.
Well, there's a song from Mike Skinner of the Streets called "The Edge of a Cliff," where he comes across a guy who's going to jump off, and he tells him some advice that he was given by somebody when he was going to jump off the cliff himself, which is everybody in your family that came before you survived and successfully passed on life. And once you kind of hear that, it kind of changes perspective and gives the character in the song a renewed impetus and a new appreciation for what they have. And it kind of ties into what you're saying, that history is this coming together of billions of strands of people surviving through their family. And that is inherently isn't fascinating before you even get into the particulars of any given life. For example, just to swing back just for one TV thing, because we mentioned Deadwood briefly in the first category. James Gandolfini in The Sopranos, his eyes. I think I always said this. I think he is the most amazing eye actor in the world, or he was when he was alive. May he rest in peace. But because he could emit violence and tenderness within the same scene. If he got angry to a crew member, you could kind of sense that he felt sorry about it, and he try and make a joke to kind of, that regret, for example, which he played with at a micro and a macro level, because you obviously have this regret and shame about being in the lifestyle, and also these little moments where he might regret being mean to a crew member in his gang. But also there's a one particular episode where he actually he's recovering from either being shot, and he's worried that his lack of physical prowess might take the leadership away from him. So he's eyeing up every member of his crew. And there's a young guy who's strong. He's good looking, and he just beats the crap out of him for no apparent reason. And he wins that fight. He goes into the bathroom and he's smiling in the mirror, and he starts coughing up blood because the physical exertion. But that whole scene shows how you have to be the top dog in this pack, and again, that is all initiated by looking, and that intense look, and also this incredible performance from a guy who, sure, we could have had another Tony Soprano, but it's now impossible to imagine any other actor apart from James Gandolfini being this man, and that's a testament to his performance,
But it also shows you why he went insane too, because he did kind of go insane. I mean, this obsession with the ducks, and he is quietly going insane in the background of all this kind of macho top dog alpha male sort of stuff. He's rejecting that at the same time, and you can see that in his eyes. Okay, the last thing I wanted to say is that, I mean, when you talk about performance and how somebody can express something really, really individual, and how important that is, reminds me of like Virginia Woolf when she was talking about how we can think of life as being a meaningless eternity in a way. I mean, in other words, there are so many people in the world. There are so many events. It seems so large and so epic. But and I just want to say, I love her description when she said that there are moments that just for some reason are meaningful to you. They are, and you kind of know it at the time. And she described it as someone in total darkness, but occasionally someone lights a match. And I think that's the best way to describe it, I think, because you can think, without getting too deep here, sorry. But I mean, when you talk about this massive thing, which is kind of existence, films, literature, all of this, sometimes it's a bit too big, but the matches that we see in the dark are these performances and are these kind of moments that really get to us, and we just understand intuitively and never forget them. And that's all I meant.
Well, that's a beautiful way to describe that. And after that,
Virginia Woolf, really.
Well, she's not here, so we can give you all the credit for that. And you wanted as well to talk about, for example, apart from performances and a single look in a moment, but also when two people maybe crackle on screen, or there's a very interesting group dynamic and an ensemble. Here we have like Llewellyn. Inside Llewellyn Davis, Catch Me If You Can, which is a classic movie, and of course Zodiac, and I'm sure we'll pull out lots of different other examples as well. But how would you like to approach this, Lindsay? What for you is a standout duo or group dynamic in a movie?
Well, it's like when you're looking at most of the time when you're watching a film, you're watching a group of people, or at least two people, because it's necessary for that interaction most of the time. And I chose Catch Me If You Can. There's a conversation where Tom Hanks is talking to the Frank Abagnale character, and he has a realization that this criminal, young man but criminal, is phoning him because he's lonely, and and it's just completely turns your expectations on their head, which I think was really good. But an even better example for me is in Inside Llewyn Davis, excuse me. In Inside Llewyn Davis, in the scene where the folk singer character is playing a song to a prospective producer or whatever, he's trying to sell himself in a way. And he plays this heartbreaking song called Queen Jane. It's just utterly heartbreaking song. And they're in a large room with empty chairs, semi-darkness, and it's in the center. It's very theatrical in a way, but naturalistic. Okay, and he plays the song, and occasionally looks up at the man for his reaction. The F. Murray Abraham character has no reaction at all. He's just a statue. And, as the song develops, you think that he's so captivated by this song, as are we as well, that you think, oh my God, what a performance. He's just rooted to the spot because this song is having such an effect. And then it finishes, and there's a slight pause, and he says, I don't see the money in it. And so this expectation of something really significant happening just gets cut down by money. And that's it. And his whole performance was just completely internalized because the dollar signs are ticking and not the emotion of the song. Brilliant. Just brilliant. That's a heartbreaking song. It really is.
I think there's a movie I can suggest. I'm not sure if anybody's seen it here. It's a combination of amazing duos and group scenes. It's The Margin Call, which is you're familiar with Lindsay. It's a movie about basically the run up to the 2008 financial crash and how they had kind of insider information about that. And there's all these tense boardroom meetings led by Jeremy Irons, and then these junior salesmen who recognize what's happening, and they're having these private conversations on top of rooftops or in fancy cars about money, what it all means, and these things. And the whole movie is just this very intense, very stylish examination of what that world is like, and not only that, but what that world is like in this situation that's about to happen. And it's cutthroat, you're a shark, and the boardroom scenes are back and forth, very tense, and it's an unknown or underrated gem, I would say. But I think it's unique in the sense that it has this balance between amazing duos and a broader, wider kind of group dynamic as well.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Even the title itself is pretty significant because a margin call is like something, a decision you make on the edge. It could work, it could not. and it has this risk factor in, like stock exchange and investment and all that. But also, margin call just means they're on the edge of morality. Their own morality is called into question. What they call, or what they, literally decide, is on one hand, it's maybe good, maybe they can be beneficial to people. On the other hand, it's pure greed.
Yeah.
And that's part of the dynamics between the people as well. They're battling with their own like ethics and morals, of which they have very little.
Just to wind up Maria as well, there's a great dynamic in Lord of the Rings. No, I'm only joking. But do you have any maybe Spanish examples of great dynamics or great group, scenarios? Which is a very general question, of course, I know, but I don't know, maybe there's a Luis Tosar movie where he's with 5 other people. It's just like, hey, we're a group and we're like having these amazing chats.
Yeah, well, I can think of a few. There's been, recently, and Luis Tosar is in a lot of these movies. It's kind of like this new genre. It's to do with, things like people that, Lindsay, you mentioned this movie before, Que no hierro mata, no? They're always like... things to do with or there's a Prison Break as well. There's another movie where he leads a prison break, but they all have like a social undertones. They're always, and Luis Tosar is always involved with this kind of movies. It's always like a social reflection about the economy or about power, things like that, and there are a couple of these movies. There's this movie as well where the name has completely escaped at the moment. A couple of them have Que no hierro mata, for example. It's a saying, in Spanish. It's the beginning of a saying. And there's another movie as well where there's another guy that gets his wife killed, and he seeks revenge. Tarde
de la Ira.
That's it.
That is a great movie. A really
that's it. Tarde para la Ira. That's it. I couldn't think of the title right now. I was picturing the actor, of course, who's massive as well, and the dialogue's there because there's such tension. Of course, like he's dealing with people that don't know what has happened, so he's having to have this normal dialogue while, of course, he's showing you all his pain, a bit what you were talking about before, being able to give you that idea of all the feelings that he has, and even about information that maybe you don't have yet about what has happened, but other times you do have it, so you're kind of like, sort of suffering with him that he has to put this brave face up, and then eventually this dialogue sort of like changes to the real dynamics. That's quite a skill as well to change from that person that basically has to hide their intentions, to when it actually becomes an open thing and everybody's aware of what has happened to him. So
and that doesn't happen until sort of quite close to the end too. So for most of the film, we think that his reactions are something, whereas in the background, deep down, it's something completely opposite, much darker. It's really wonderful movie. It's a movie that if you watch it again, then you're watching it like almost a mirror image of the film. You think, oh my God, that's how you feel. That's how it's really feel. Yeah, good choice. I love that movie.
Lindsay, you've also mentioned the Zodiac, and the question I want to ask you is, do you think detective movies lend themselves more naturally, or even criminal movies, if you think of Reservoir Dogs, but this both sides of the law lend themselves naturally to this group or duo situation, or do you think that also can be particularly strong in other genres as well?
Well, so I think Zodiac is an unusual thing because the good guys against what is, like normally sort of the current in the last 20, 30 years, the good guys are the cops. Normally we see where we talk about, like Marie, you were talking about the ambiguity of the characters in Tarde de la Ira. I mean, there's all ambiguity all the time. But in this one, it's kind of not like that. The people who really are the good people are the police. And in this case, when they're questioning what may have been the Zodiac killer, probably whatever, they're actually sort of working together as a team using eye contact and questions, but there's nothing malevolent about it. It's just a really interesting technique, and you can see the detectives and how their minds are working. And especially at the end when he leaves, and there's a pan shot as he's going past, and it's just they're all completely still. It's like a tableau, and you can see that they have decided, and they're all thinking the same thing. It's like I don't know. It's very expressive, simple in a way, but really, really expressive and unambiguous, which is different to what we were saying before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the one I really want to talk about is Teen Beach Movie.
This classic.
Yeah, look, this is more like the practical thing of how people work together in a scene and in a dance scene and a performance like that. And Teen Beach Movie is it's I'm not sure if it's Disney, but it's a kids movie, a movie for teenagers. And I watched it with my daughter, and what really struck me is that the way that they were performing was just so professional and so clear, but kind of dynamic as well. I mean, okay, you've seen lots and lots of dance sequences in Glee and High School Musical and all that sort of thing, and it's in that particular vein for sure. But the way they're done sort of just has this little bit extra. It has this little kind of extra sort of enthusiasm to it, which really hits you. And it was quite noticeable to me at the time. For example, there's one scene where these kids teenagers from the early 1960s, for some reason, they suddenly see a mobile phone, and they all crowd around this mobile phone, and they look at it. And they all jump back, looking at it in such surprise, thinking, oh, what the hell is that? And then they go back and they approach it again, and as if it's some wonderful godlike creature. It's a mobile phone. We look at them now all the time. Excuse me. We look at them now all the time as just as part of our normal vision. But to them, it was something miraculous. And it reminded me almost like some meerkats, some suricatas, some meerkats all reacting as one and then going back and reacting again. So just simply for the performance, I thought it was, really, really good and funny. It was really funny.
Well, it's a movie with a rare distinction of having its title also being a genre as well. How many movie titles are actually...
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
This is what it is, and this is the name of the movie as well. I think in terms of duos, there's one more movie that we could mention that I think has to be mentioned for a lot of reasons. It's Heat with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, because it's obviously famous for when they finally meet in that cafe scene, which lasts 3-4 minutes. It's the only time they're on screen together. Well, until they make a movie in 2016 or something, which is terrible. But their whole dynamic is that they're a duo, but they never really see each other. It's like it's they miss each other, or like he's trying to catch him. So it's a relationship that's played out in the cat and mouse dynamic as well, but they're so tied to each other because of their shared destinies. And of course, in the resolution of the movie, they're brought back together again and only one will walk away, of course, set against an epic Moby soundtrack and the lights of LAX airport. But it's just, I think it's fascinating dynamic, because it's a dynamic that's done in absentia, really, until they finally do get to meet face to face on two separate occasions in the movie. I think that's the skill of Michael Mann, directing, and I think he wrote the movie as well, to make these characters connected, even though they are not physically connected, not in a romantic sense, but they're not like sharing the same physical space for most of the movie. And for example, by way of contrast, I haven't really seen many episodes of this, but there's the show Killing Eve, where there's that dynamic as well a little bit, but it's not done in the same articulate way, where it's like they have the episode and then they have to kind of shoehorn in the fact that they're kind of connected in some way. While, as you mentioned earlier, I think, I can't remember, it's about Mad Men, I think you said it's a machine, the way everything is like kind of flows.
Natural machine.
Yeah, and that's what it is. Like they can just have that narrative and that dynamic effortlessly, and you don't see the strings, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast as well. So that's my nomination. And
Killing Eve is interesting because, I mean, if anybody's listening, I'm going to tell you the end.
No worries.
Okay, switched off. It's a love story. I mean, it's a love story, which is just wonderful. I thought it was incredibly funny and really complicated characters and all that. It's great, but it's a love story. Whereas the scene in Heat, where they're sitting there talking about really exchanging each other's philosophies in a way. Yeah. To me, it's like two generals meeting in no man's land.
Well, two kindred spirits in a sense as well, because they're men who are driven by their work, solitary. Robert De Niro does get a girlfriend, but he spends a lot of time alone. Al Pacino goes through wives and stuff, and they're men who are so driven and so good at what they do, but ultimately flawed as well. And so also exchanging the fact that we're going to see this through to the end. If it's between you and some other guy, brother, you're going down, is what he says, and the other person says that as well. And but like they're two, like the classic war movie as well, we're two sides of the same coin, and that is who they are. They are kind of soulmates in that non-romantic sense, but they're so similar in what they are, who they are.
Yes. And the real kick at the end is the fact that they just say plainly to each other, despite the fact that we're speaking here now and we can kind of come to sort of understanding of who we are, I will kill you.
Yeah.
No, I will kill you. And it's almost like, I hope I will kill you, because that is my job. So they're saying, don't be deceived by the closeness that we're having at the moment. I will kill you.
And that's all underscored as well by the dialogue, because not only are they these charismatic actors who are giving the performances of a lifetime, but the dialogue is so great, because like there's so, like, what do I have? Born to lose, tattooed on my chest, is what De Niro says to Al Pacino, and it's all these kind of things where they speak with this cadence, and they speak with this kind of authenticity, which sounds very pretentious, I know, but how their patter and how their words interlock with each other as well is so captivating. It's a standout scene in any movie, Well,
then you can talk about the difference between something that is purely naturalistic and something that is expressive, even though it's not natural. For example, there's a play by August Strindberg. Oh God, I forgot the name of it. The Stronger, it's called. And it's just two women who meet. You probably know this play anyway, but I mean, they're two women who meet and sit down in a cafe, and they face each other. And it's not naturalistic in the sense that one of them does not speak at all, which is, like that. People don't do that, so it's not natural. One of them doesn't speak, and the other one's speaking the whole time, and you never know which of the two is the stronger. Is the one stronger because there's one woman stronger because she is speaking and controlling the situation and expressing her ideas, or is the other woman stronger because she has the power to keep silent? That's not a naturalistic situation at all, because people would, people don't do that, but it's really effective. It's really effective.
Well, that reminds me of a scene in Parachute Them, because that's a series of short movies with different styles, and it's blending naturalism with something else. And because even there's a scene with a short movie in that movie with Steve Buscemi, which is kind of gothic and kind of supernatural, magic realism even. And but then there's a short movie where an American actor, there's a French guy speaking to him in French, and the American guy doesn't speak French. He's just kind of sitting there going, in silence. And that dynamic is there as well. And you're right, that wouldn't really happen, because you would say like, I don't speak French. Like, I'm sorry, but but this guy's just kind of sitting there and taking it all in. And it's kind of funny as well, because not only is that like a kind of unnaturalistic scene, but it's also in this wider piece where other movies will have something more natural about them as well. So it's an interesting idea. I haven't seen the other two ones. They have New York, I Love You, and another city, I think Berlin. I haven't seen those, but Parachute Them is decent and has that kind of dynamic as well in one of the movies.
I haven't seen any of those movies. It sounds interesting then.
So in this idea of duos and great dynamics, are there any other movies that we have to mention, or TV shows, before we start saying our adioses and our so longs and good looks?
Put me on the spot here. Killing Eve was a good example, because that's a great sort of dynamic duo as well. Put me on the spot here.
Don't worry, Lindsay. If you can't think of anything.
I did write down Deadwood. If we're going to just briefly talk about television show. Well, in general, yes. There was after 2000, in the late 90s, there was a renaissance of television. Yeah, without a doubt. Because before that, I'm old enough to remember television in the 80s. I remember this, and it was terrible. It was just dreadful. And most of the 90s, except for Seinfeld and a couple of things, was terrible as well. But in the 90s, and then really, it started to develop into much more complex and interesting drama in the 90s and in the 2000s. So we're living in a golden age in a way of television, which really only existed in the 50s and early 60s. I think, with Playhouse Theatre and Twilight Zone and things like that, which are still amazing to see, really, really good. So in that whole gap in the 70s and 80s and most of the 90s as well, I can't think of anything very interesting. And now there's almost too much.
But the burden of choice. Deadwood, I think, is a great example. Oz probably kickstarted that whole HBO golden era, and then you show like Deadwood coming shortly after, and it's a very interesting show because there's so much swearing in it, but back then, the swearing, if you ever see like tarnation and those kind of words, those were like the C bombs of their time, but of course, if a characters are saying tarnation, it wouldn't really be very impactful today, so they're dropping F-bombs and C-bombs left, right, and center, but a great show. And I think what you mentioned earlier about every scene or every episode even being like this movie quality storytelling, that's what Deadwood is as well. Even if the main actor is like a bit Clint Eastwood, like, as in kind of like narrow eyes and speaking with clenched lips, but he's still very, very good. And I think, I grew up with Lovejoy, Ian McShane as Lovejoy. So seeing him as this saloon owner and so mean, and in fact, actually going back to kind of go full circle, in the first season, there's a guy who I think is crippled or is mentally unwell, but I can't remember exactly what it is because it's been a few years. Maybe it's the priest, I think. And he's in one of the final episodes of the season, he's walking through the town and he's not well. And you can just see Ian McShane just looking at him like with all the empathy in the world, even though he is the villain of the show, especially, well, at least in the first season. And, that's I think it's a show that has all of the elements that we've kind of discussed: strong performances, dynamic duos, fantastic groups, and, these kind of looks and impactful, quiet moments as well. And now
I think a really interesting concept as well about the idea of people who sometimes speak in a very florid Shakespearean almost kind of way, very, very eloquent. And in the next sentence, or even in the same sentence, this really foul language as well. So they start talking very eloquently, and then you're back down in the gutter again, which I thought it was a really interesting thing to do. Really, really good.
I guess it's a great metaphor for America. America is this modern country now, but it was built on these wild frontiers with these wild men doing wild things, you know. So it's just the origin is dirty, you know, these kind of outposts that eventually grow to become respectable and everything, which is the myth of the Old West as well, you know, built by cowboys, but once it's built, there's no place for those cowboys either, you know. So it's a very interesting dynamic. So yes, now that we have come full circle, I think this is a great moment to thank you so much, Lindsay, for your great insight, your passion.
I'm blabbing away like I blab away in my own mind.
No, it's been great. I really loved it, and like I said in the last podcast, I won't speak for Maria, but I'm sure it's been the same for her as well.
Of course. No, it was brilliant. Thank you so much. And I was looking forward to meeting you after last time, because you two had a very interesting chat. And now I was really happy to be part of it again. So yeah.
That was great.
Yeah,
I feel like we should have done more preparation to give you like more time to explain your vision of things as well, because it was just me going blah 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 blah.
No, don't worry. I think we had a great group dynamic here as well, so don't worry about that. And anyway, we're going to refine this process. We'll have you back for a third episode, a fourth and a fifth.
Oh, really?
And by the time we have the 10th episode, it's going to be down to a fine arts, you know, it's going to be, you know, a masterclass. So Lindsay, it's Saturday morning here. We're recording this. Have a great day. And again, it's been a pleasure for us. And, you know, you're a friend of the show. You're welcome back anytime.
Same to you both. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.